So in last lecture, we looked at the Chinese city, and we know there were two models. One is an idealized model recorded in the Book of Rites, and another is more based on practicality that eventually evolved into the feng shui theory. And most actual Chinese cities were built blending the two models together. And we looked at the some local states in the Eastern Zhou period, the spring and autumn period, the Warring States period. These are the two subcategories of the Eastern Zhou period. And we were just about to move on to the Qin and Han Dynasty, for which we looked at their architecture already. And so, I want to show you this map, because this map, I like it because it does not only show China, but also how China is connected with the world during the Qin Han period. So here we have China. And during the Han Dynasty, the land directly administered by the Qin and Han government is pretty much this area. So it is both more and less than the present day country of China. It is less because at that time, the Gobi Desert, today's Mongolian area, was controlled by a nomadic group known as the Xiongnu. Right? This is the spelling of the Xiongnu. That these are the nomad in the northern prairies and Gobi Desert. And this is also why the Great Wall was built, basically to create a border between the nomadic people and the settled life of the Chinese farmers. And the Tibetan Plateau was not part of China back then. But it is also more because the Han Empire controlled northern part of Korea. So that was, part of the Han Empire, as well as the northern part of today's Vietnam. So while the Qin Dynasty constructed the Great Wall to define a border and to protect the settled life south of the wall, the Han Dynasty developed the so-called Silk Road. Well, the word Silk Road was coined in the 19th century. So it was a new word, but it depicts a cultural and economical phenomena that linked the ancient world of the East and the ancient world of the West. In the East, during the 1st century, for example, was the Han Dynasty, which was a very powerful empire. And on the western end was the Roman Empire in the 1st century. So the Silk Road back then connect these two ends of the old world, the two great empire of West and East. And in between there were many other kingdoms, empires. So it was an ancient trade route, but it was first kind of connected to the Chinese world through military expedition. The Han Empire, hoping to find allies in the West to fight the Xiongnu, which was considered a threat to the North. So while the Qin Dynasty strengthened the Great Wall, trying to block them out, the Han Empire tried to defeat them. So the fourth emperor of the Han Dynasty sent an envoy to the western country of the Kushan Empire. The Kushan Empire was founded by a people known as Yuezhi. You don't need to worry about this term, but the homeland of the Yuezhi people who founded the Kushan Empire in today's, Afghanistan and Pakistan used to be lived to the north of China, relatively peacefully with the Chinese during the Zhou Dynasty, but the Xiongnu invaded their homeland from farther remote area and pushed the Kushan people, the Yuezhi people, west, migrating kind of westward, and eventually they kind of founded an empire in this area. So the Han people knew about them, but back then, this huge desert known as Takalamakan Desert. Takalamakan Desert back then was like a vast sea, like an unknown ocean, and no one had traveled that, but that Han envoy explored that after many years of hardship. So they followed the oasis in the desert and eventually found the Yuezhi people and discovered that they founded a comfortable home in a totally different area, and they were not willing to be involved in war anymore. So that military connection was unsuccessful. However, the road was established. So a passageway, taking advantage of a series of oases in the desert to link the Chinese capital back then, Chang'an city, with the Kushan cities. And Kushan Empire back then was already connected to the West. So the East and the West was linked that way. So the city of Chang'an, which was the capital city of the Han Dynasty, before that, the capital city of the Qin Dynasty was a city called Shenyang, which is very close to Chang'an, almost on the same location, which we are going to look at. That was the capital city for the Qin Dynasty. So during the Qin and Han Dynasty, from the 3rd century BCE to the 3rd century CE, very easy to remember of this period, Chinese cities were, well, not kind of international, but, nonetheless, was the city of a world that was much better connected than the previous Zhou Dynasty. And that is something that, we will we will look at today. So here I have the map of the Chang'an area. I apologize that I didn't find a good map marked with English terms, but I'm going to mark it for you here. So the Qin Dynasty, Shenyang, and Han Dynasty, Chang'an City, which were the capital city of these two kind of successive empires, were located on the bank of the Wei River. So this is the Wei River. The Wei River is a tributary to the Yellow River. So this is part of the Yellow River system. And Qin Dynasty, Shenyang is this one, right? So that's the city of Shenyang. During the Qin and Han Dynasty, the Wei River is not exactly like this. This is a modern river map. Back then, the Wei River flows more south. So the Qin capital city of Shenyang was located comfortably to the north bank of the Wei River, but later the river changed the course and destroyed much of the ruins of the Qin Shenyang city. So we don't know much about this city because it was badly damaged in the next 2,000 years. The Han Dynasty founded their capital to the south of the Wei River. No matter whether the Han people realize it or not, the southern bank was much safer. Right? So this is the Han Dynasty capital city. It's called Chang'an. The Chang'an city. No matter whether they realize it or not, the southern bank was much safer. I remember that when we look at the Shang Dynasty capital city of the Yin, and I asked a question, why the city was located at a certain location, and one of the reason is you wanted to have locate a city by a river in a way that in a place that is kind of wrapped up by the river, because that is usually the area where the land is increasing. The erosion happened on the other side of the river. So Han Dynasty Chang'an is located in such a location where the river does not move further south, but rather north. So this the Han Dynasty, capital, and there are many other cities we will look at in the future. This city, which is also in the same location, is also called Chang'an. This is the Tang Dynasty Chang'an, right? The Tang Dynasty Chang'an. And they are located pretty much in the same location, and they were named the same name, even though their precise location of the city walls are different. So we will look at this later. And there are some other cities which were older, much older, like this one. This is the Zhou Dynasty capital city, which was also kind of buried under water. There are some later water body formed. And as a result, we don't know much about the Zhou Dynasty, capital city located in this location very much. And there was also a Qin Dynasty. Qin Dynasty also built a palace area, which is to the south of the Wei River, and that is this one. That's the famous Epang Palace. It was built in the Qin Dynasty, but it was not a city. It is just because a city means, commoners and those common people also live in there. But this area was not. It was just a palace. It was just for the emperor. So archaeologists were able to excavate part of the Qin Dynasty Shenyang city, and but only the some palaces, and those palaces occupied high ground in the city, so they were in the central area, and that area was not destroyed by the later change of the rivers. So this is the so-called Shenyang Palace. It is located somewhere here on the higher ground of the Qin capital city of Shenyang. So this is the current situation after archaeological clearing up. And there, archaeologists discovered large areas of rammed earth platform. And these rammed earth platform, from your reading from the previous lectures, you understand that when you discover those high rammed earth platform, that means it was a significant architectural site from the early history of China, because back then rammed earth platform was combined with wooden structures to create an appearance of grandeur, and a series of wooden surrounding structures were built on top and around the rammed earth platform to create a multi-story looking, and to elevate the structure to a height that shows, physically as well as symbolically, a high ground, a ground in control above the common living areas. Excuse me. So these are the platform, and they are on different levels, but you should imagine wooden structure used to be on top and surrounding them. The type was also well recorded in those recorded history known as the Taixie architectural type, which is basically an early type of monumental Chinese architecture that combined the earth and wood for the creation of monumentality. And the significance of these buildings was also confirmed by other discoveries. For example, their terracotta floor bricks were discovered, and this is a floor brick. And they used to pave the ground for the interior of these buildings, and they were beautifully molded with with patterns and which demonstrate the luxury of these large-scale architecture. With the bricks, there were also bronze wooden member end, as what I showed you last time from the Zhou Dynasty. So that were continued to be used to protect the kind of a more vulnerable joint for those mortise and tenon wooden members. So this is the site for the palace of the Qin Dynasty, known as the Shenyang Palace. And archaeologists tried to reconstruct it based on archaeological kind of footprint of the building, and together with the knowledge about the Qin Dynasty architecture from the two-dimensional and three-dimensional images from that period. So again, no complete building survived from the Qin Dynasty, but with the help of archaeology and art history, scholars was able to create drawings like this. So from outside, the building looks multi-story. At some part, it was 2-story, and some parts 3-story, and some parts even looks 4-story. But if you look at the section of the drawing, you realize the actual interior space was no more than 2 stories. So the highest real kind of interior, architectural entity is this part, right? Which is this part. It's only 2-story. It created a 3-4-story looking because of the elevation of the rammed earth platform. So these rammed earth allowed the attaching of corridors to create a false looking of a large kind of forced story. And this is the known in architectural history as high platform building. This is a building type specifically associated with the Qin Han period and before, and Zhou Dynasty and Qin and Han Dynasty. In traditional historical record, these buildings like that was known as taixie. So we have a lot of images carved into the bronze vessels and painted on the wall, or on the relieved on the walls of tomb, and which testified that the architecture was created this way. This is the longitudinal section, which means you cut the building along its long side and get a section view. And this is the transverse section, which means you cut it on the short side. So the both showed the characteristic of the taixie architecture, which combined rammed earth and wooden structures. And this is also why in traditional Chinese term, architecture is known as tumu, which literally means earth and wood, right? So this is the how ancient Chinese refer to architecture and architectural projects. They call it Tu Mu. Tu means earth, and Mu means wood. Indeed, ancient architecture, the two primary material was the earth and wood. These are the plans of the Shenyang Palace. So from the plan, you can also see the rammed earth core for the complex. So this is the first story of the Shenyang Palace, and this is the second story. And then above this wall, there is also a third story. The archaeological site only preserved a half of what is reconstructed by archaeologists. But some archaeology believe that the building, belonged to a symmetrical complex, which also had a, the other part. So this part is not really preserved in archaeology, but based on the knowledge of the traditional Chinese convention in architecture, it seems likely that there is a symmetrical part just next to it and also connected on the upper levels. How reliable that is a question mark, but the that's the situation of archaeological discovery. Usually you only recover part of it, but based on our understanding of the past, some additional reconstruction to be made. So symmetry, that is, our understanding of traditional Chinese architecture, and sometimes we also use that knowledge to complete the incomplete pictures that survived the long vicissitude of history. So now let's take a look at Han Dynasty, Chang'an, which is this one I showed you in the previous map. So this is the Qin Dynasty, capital city, partially destroyed by the Wei River, which we just looked at. And this is the Han Dynasty capital city called Chang'an. The Chang'an means long peace or eternal peace. So this is the city of eternal peace, and it is located to the south of the Wei River. The Han Dynasty capital city of Chang'an has a kind of irregular shape. If you read the old texts, you might think all the Chinese city should be in perfect square shape, and with straight walls on cardinal directions, and gates located on symmetrically on each side. But Han Chang'an city, which was completely excavated and confirmed in archaeology, has an irregular shape, and the irregularity of the city happened primarily on the north side, where the river flow, right? So there is a tributary of the Wei River, which is called the Jue River, and which is a tributary to the Wei River, and the Wei River was a tributary to the Yellow River. So again, this is part of the Yellow River system. Flow from southwest to northeast to join the Wei River. And as a result, the northwestern part of the city has this zigzag shape instead of a straight line. But other than that, the other direction of the city was primarily straight, especially the eastern side, which is perfectly straight, with 3 gates located on the eastern wall. The western wall had, one bend. There is it's much more regular than the north side, but not as regular as the east side. Same was the southern walls. So obviously the city construction of the city wall followed the natural elements in topography, that is kind of more kind of following the feng shui idea of working with nature. But we also find that there were features following the Book of Rites for the construction for the Son of Heaven. For example, on each side there were 3 major gates, and this is depicted in the Book of Rites, in that classical kind of ideal city text. So on the east side we have 3 gates. On the north side, even though the wall was irregular, there were also 3 major gates, right? Same as the west side and the south side. That is following the Book of Rites pretty well. 3 gates on each side. And the same text also dictated that a capital city for the Son of Heaven needed to have kind of cardinally oriented street and avenues inside the wall to define a checkerboard like kind of framework for the city. And that was also pretty much the case. So we have these cardinally oriented streets and walls dividing the city, even though right now it does not confirm to the number 9 as what the text had said. But they are cardinally oriented, and they are straight and broad streets. And the city in general, the walls are also oriented toward the cardinal direction. So this is the north, and this shows the cardinal direction. In one word, the Han Dynasty Chang'an is a combination of feng shui and practicality, feng shui practicality, and the Book of Rites idealization. So it was a combination of the 2. There were consideration of the natural environment. There was also an effort made to create a city that is appropriate for the Son of Heaven, according to the definition in the Book of Rites. To the south of the city, there were a series of ritual architecture, which are this one. And we are going to look at one structure, that is the Mingtang, that was also archaeologically confirmed. The city itself, inside the city, palace occupied more than half the area of the city. So in this plan, those shaded area are the palace quarters, right? There's a major palace on the east side of the main north-south thoroughfare called the Changle Palace. And then the Weiyang Palace was located on the west side of that avenue. To the north of the Changle Palace, there was a Mingguang Palace. And then there is also a Gui Palace. And outside the city wall, there's another kind of huge palace combined with the park. And that is the Jianjian Palace, which is here. So these 4 palaces inside the city occupied already, half the territory for the interior of the city. That's why some scholars believe that the Han Dynasty, this city was just the Cheng. And I explained the last time that Cheng was to protect the ruler, Chinese term. And then what is the other term for the part of the city to retain the people? That is called Guo, right? So some scholars believe this might be just the Cheng part of the Chang'an, and there was a larger area of the Guo, which were for the common citizens, while living inside this enclosure were mostly, the emperor, imperial family, the bureaucratic offices, and the residence for the officials and aristocrat. So some scholars believe this was just the aristocratic city of the Cheng, while there was a bigger city, presumably also enclosed by walls, maybe not as well constructed as this wall, and that was the Guo. So that was one theory about why the palace occupied such a unusually large area in the city of Chang'an. And the same as the Shenyang Palace from the Qin Dynasty, the Han capital city Chang'an also left us those high platforms. So we are not going to look at these in great detail, but this is what those high platform looks like. So today, even though only the platform survived, the great scale is impressive. So imagine the whole platform was wrapped up by wooden structures around the periphery and on the top to create a huge complex of multi-story buildings. And archaeologists were also able to kind of create the drawing of their plan based on the discoveries, understanding where those platforms were located, where the stairs were laid, and where there used to be a pond and a bridge, etc. So after the Han Dynasty, China was entered an age known as the Age of Disunion. This is actually the first age of disunions among many ages of disunions that would follow. But the Han Empire was destroyed by the peasant uprising due to natural disaster, flooding of the river, and a drought and famine followed. So from that chaos, eventually 3 powerful states were founded: the Wei state in the north, the Shu state in the southwest, and the Wu state in the south. With their capital city, the Wei state had their capital city in Luoyang, and Luoyang was the capital of the Eastern Han Dynasty. But the Wei state also had another capital city called the city of Ye, which is located somewhere here. So it has multiple capital cities from different time. The capital city for the Shu state is in Chengdu, and Wu state is in Jiankang, which is today's city of Nanjing, by the way. So China broke up into smaller states, and which was unified in the year 280 by the Qin Dynasty. The Qin families used to serve the Wei court, but eventually they took the power from the Wei rulers, which is the Cao family, and founded the Qin Dynasty. And this is the 4th tone of the character, right? Jin, because there are other dynasties which is spelled the same but pronounced with different tone, like the Jin Dynasty, and that is a 12th century to 13th century Chinese dynasty. Eventually unified China. Unified entire China, but only for a few decades. So after that, eventually the northern nomads broke into the Great Wall and occupied the northern half of China. And that was in the 4th century. In the 4th century, the nomads destroyed the court of the Jin Dynasty in the north, and they founded a series of small kingdoms in the Yellow River area in North China. And the Jin court moved to the south, to the city of today's Nanjing, which was called Jiankang back then. Which was also the previous capital city for the Wu states during the 3 Kingdoms period. All right, so I'm just trying to show you the disunified feature of China from the 3rd century to the 6th century. So this is the map of the Eastern Jin Dynasty and the so-called 16 kingdoms. Those 16 kingdoms were mostly founded by non-Chinese speaking nomadic people who broke into the Great Wall and occupied the Yellow River. The disunity continued in the north. The Wei, founded by the Toba Xianbei people, a non-Chinese people, unified much of the north. And the southern China, basically you can understand it as, you know, the Yellow River region and the Yangtze River region and and together with the southern area. The southern area experienced a successive change of dynasty. 4 of them, they were the Song, Qi, Liang, and Chen. All right, so these are the southern dynasties. So their territory was relatively stable, but the ruling families changed. While in the north, the territory was not very stable. It was divided and unified and then divided again. So this period is called the Northern and Southern Dynasty, where the north first unified by the Northern Wei in the early 5th century, and then split up again in the early 6th century into a western part and eastern part. So this is a kind of a complicated age of disunity. And eventually the unification came from the north, all right? So from the northwestern kingdom of Northern Zhou, a very powerful military guy took the throne and first conquered the eastern state of Qi and then conquered the southern state of Chen and founded the second kind of unified era of China. And that was the Sui Tang period. So that empire was known as the Sui Dynasty. So Sui, right here, this one, the Sui Dynasty, unified China again in the year 589. So this map was just trying to show you the kind of the chaos, the disunity. China was not always remained one country. There existed many, many different countries in history. So so during this period, during this entire period, the city of Luoyang remained a very important city for North China. It was the capital city for the Eastern Han Dynasty. It also served as the capital city for the Wei state during the Three Kingdom period, and also the capital city for the Western Jin Dynasty before the invasion of the barbarians. You know, I use the barbarians in quotation mark, you know, the speaking people who were primarily nomadic before they settled in North China. It also served as the capital city for the following Northern Wei Dynasty, which was founded by the Toba Xianbei. And like the city of Chang'an, even though the cities were located in the same place, they underwent a series of reconstructions for each successive dynasties. So this is the map of the Eastern Han period, Luoyang, city of Luoyang. So during the Eastern Han period, excuse me, during the Eastern Han period, the city itself, like the Han city of Chang'an, I know, you know, my internet connection is you know, I will try to see what I can do. Okay, I hope it's better. Like the Western Han capital city of Chang'an, the palace occupied much territory inside the city. So during the Eastern Han Dynasty, there was a northern palace, there was a southern palace, but we don't know much about the Eastern Han Dynasty because it was, it was on the same location, but it was buried under a lower ground, lower layers of the archaeological site, and much information had lost. But we do know during the Eastern Han period, there were 2 palaces that occupied a large territory of the city. And we don't know much about the Eastern Han city wall. But for the from the 3rd century to the early 4th century, we know a little better because that layer, that archaeological layer was better preserved. And during that period, the southern palace was pretty much abandoned and the northern palace was strengthened. And there was also a big avenue connecting the south wall of the palace with the south gate of the palace with the south gate of the city at large. And there were also kind of castles which were elevated on high ground to the northwest. All right, so there were kind of a castle, or if we treat the entire city as a castle, then that is like the keep. It is like the last resort for the rulers to stay safe, invasion and chaos. We know much better about the Northern Wei Luoyang, because Northern Wei Luoyang, that was pretty much on the same layer as the Qin Dynasty. And we also have more historical written record about the Northern Wei Luoyang. There was a book specifically about contemporary Northern Wei Luoyang, survived from the 6th century. So we know that city much better, and it pretty much continued the Eastern Jin. It was built on the foundation of the Western Jin dynasty Luoyang. So it has one palace, and the city was constructed in a way that is more centralized on the palace city, right? So there is a palace city in the north center, and there is a inner city, which is pretty much based on the previous cities of Luoyang, and then there is an outer city. So this would be Cheng, and this would be Guo, right? Basically the inner city and outer city, continuing the ancient tradition of having the inner city of Cheng to protect the ruler and to shelter the aristocratic households. And then there's a much bigger enclosure of outer city of Guo to provide homes for the commoners. The city was also more strengthened by a north-south axis. And this north-south axis is basically a big avenue connecting the major gate of the inner city, presumably outer city. So the wall for the outer city was yet to be discovered, as well as the palace city. So this would be the palace city. So 3 layers: palace city, inner city, and outer city. So the city looks much more regularized and centralized compared to the Han Dynasty capital of Chang'an because of its axiality, and along this axis, symmetrical complexes were constructed. All right, so there were temples and sacrificial architectures, and as well as governmental architecture, framing the central axis, and then the palace city is located at its north end, at the north end of this axis. These are the detailed drawing for the palatial quarter for the city of Luoyang. So again, this was from the Western Jin period, and this was from the Northern Wei period. These are the palace, just this part for the Son of Heaven. So the Western Jin city of Luoyang, the palace had 3 kind of concentric rings, while the Northern Wei, Luoyang, it was constructed to form a northern and a southern section. The northern section was like reserved park, reserved garden for the imperial family. And then the southern part of the palace city was divided into a central part, a western part, and an eastern part. The western part was occupied by the mother of the current emperor, and the eastern part was occupied by the crown prince, and the central part was occupied by the current emperor. So building complex also followed the axis for the location of the main halls, and buildings in the southern area closer to the gate were bigger and more spacious, and those are the ceremonial part. And then the northern part, buildings were smaller and more kind of intimate in scale. Those provide the sleeping chambers for the emperor and his family. So the fashion of this Northern Wei Luoyang is significant because we will see in later Chinese cities, for example, the Ming and the Qin Dynasty Forbidden City of Beijing is directly a descendant of the Northern Wei Luoyang in terms of its kind of concentric plan of outer city, inner city, and palace city, as well as the way the palace was constructed along a central north-south axis. Probably the single most unique quality of the Northern Wei Luoyang compared to previous imperial capitals of China is the appearance of Buddhist pagoda in the city. All right. So Northern Wei Luoyang had many Buddhist temples. Buddhism was introduced to China in Eastern Han Dynasty around the 1st century CE, but it was not until the Northern Wei period that Buddhism became a kind of widespread religion and also adopted as the state religion for a unified dynasty in North China. So Northern Wei Luoyang was significant because of its sponsorship of Buddhism, right? Before that, the main religions of China were Confucianism and Taoism. However, under Northern Wei Buddhism gained great popularity, and the city itself has hundreds of Buddhist temples, which were recorded in written history. This is a reconstruction drawing for the city of Northern Wei Luoyang. It shows those vertical structures, and those vertical structures are pagoda. And where there are pagoda, there are Buddhist monasteries, right? So under that pagoda, a large area was basically a monastery, a temple. So Chinese city, for the first time, was dominated by a vertical element. Before that, the Chinese city was very, very flat. After that, it was still flat, but at least there are these kind of vertical pagodas to kind of to grace the skyline of a Chinese city, right? So Buddhism brought new looking to Chinese city with that kind of verticality, those towers. And in Northern Wei Luoyang, there are many of these kind of Buddhist monument of pagoda, which we are going to look in detail in next lecture. So just to show you in the last slide, the current condition of Northern Wei Luoyang. So the city wall were constructed with rammed earth, right? So it's a kind of rammed earth platform with rammed earth city wall. So this is their current situation, how they look today, right? So they were human construction, as you can see, even in this not super high quality photo, you can see the layers. These are the layers for the pounding of the earth during the construction process of these rammed earth walls. This is a gate of the Northern Wei Luoyang city, and a student was, taking notes and doing survey there. All right, so I think that's enough for the cities before the 6th century CE, and we will continue to look at architecture, specifically architecture during the Age of Disunion, and especially during the Northern Wei period, focusing on Buddhist architecture.